were Ursula, Olaf, Fove, and Marianne Rudolph. And it was a bit scary being dumped into a class with very little English, but we were well received, and each of us was assigned an American student to guide us around. Still, a lot was strange to us. For instance, an assignment of having to pick words that had to do with summer from a list on the chalkboard. I recognized a few, but picnic was new. Another incident was in the cafeteria when lunch included a tamale, and I think I went hungry that day. I and several others attended Crockett School for the low and high third and the low and high fourth grades. The teachers and students were very welcoming, and only one teacher in all the four had that little animosity toward the German kids. In the low fourth, I had a very memorable teacher, Mrs. Downstairs Braun, to distinguish her from Mrs. Upstairs Brown. She spent much time on social studies, or so it seemed. We were guided to copy photographs of flowering cactus for a study of the Rio Grande and the lands along the river. And I absolutely loved the drawing part and kept the report in folder for a long time. The following year, a group of us was moved to Houston School for low fifth, and there again we were a curiosity. Only Crystal Angela and Helga Minning were in my homeroom, but it was a good half year with more interaction with our American classmates. For the high fifth grade, we were again moved. Our little class of fifth graders and our teacher from Houston School, Mrs. McAngus, were housed in a self-contained building somewhere between Fort Bliss proper and the compound. The students were all Germans and Army dependents. It was a very informal situation. We had a small stage, and it prompted a number of plays put on by the students. The playground was just sand, so no more jacks playing as we had in Crockett and Houston schools. And I cannot remember the lunch situation, probably sock lunches. Transportation to all the schools was by Army bus with an MP on board to keep us in line. On weekends, once we were allowed to roam further, our family, like many others, spent time exploring the region. My father really loved the desert and the plants and the mountains and the variety of rocks that were easy to find. But on outings to the Sacramento Mountains in New Mexico, to both Cloudcroft and Ruidoso were favorites. There was a national forest in the Sacramento Mountains in contrast to the Franklin and Morgan Mountains, which were rocky and closer to El Paso. The Sacramentos are also the site of the Mescalera Apache Indian Reservation, and the first time we had encountered any Native Americans. We also visited White Sands, New Mexico, National Monument in New Mexico a number of times, and those high gypsum sand dunes were great for sliding down. And then there were several trips to Carlsbad Caverns where you could eat a box lunch far down in a large cool room. The rock formations there were truly impressive. Closer by in El Paso, there were a number of outings. We went to a real rodeo. We made a number of visits to the museum at the College of Mines, which is now University of Texas in El Paso. They had a fantastic rock and mineral collection, and the UV light there could give some very amazing colors. It seemed like, to us, that my father made sure we visited every national monument, national park, or significant site that was an easy driving distance from El Paso. When we learned the team was to be moved to Alabama, we had our grand tour of the Southwest, a several-day-long trip to Arizona and parts of New Mexico we had missed. We saw the Grand Canyon, the Painted Desert, Petrified Forest, Meteor Crater, Flagstaff, Montezuma Castle, and several other sites, and down Oak Creek Canyon to Phoenix, where the temperature was 110 plus degrees. And then back to Fort Bliss, Silver City, New Mexico. On this trip, we encountered one ghost town when the map showed a town not far ahead that would be a good place for the night. But when we got there, there was a few rundown deserted buildings, so we had another hour or so in the car. And I'm really grateful that my father was interested in visiting all these places. It certainly influenced my later outlook. About this time, late 1949, 1950, the government decided that the paperclip scientists could apply for U.S. citizenship. This meant leaving the country and entering again legally. Juarez across the Rio, excuse me, across the Rio Grande from El Paso was the choice. We rode a streetcar across the bridge and took a visit to the U.S. consulate for paperwork, and then we had to return to Texas. After 5 years residency from that date, we would become naturalized citizens. The final ceremony happened in Alabama. Or for a group of us teenagers in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and I never was sure why. I have a clipping somewhere, I'll have to check. And soon we had to make the trip to Huntsville, still in the 41 Olds. By now there was a dog plus the 3 children, and in true form we did a lot of sightseeing along the way. I remember the Alamo, a zoo, a stop in Houston, and then we crossed under Mobile Bay in the tunnel, and finally came into Huntsville late one evening. I was somewhat prepared for our new environment in Texas. My father had written many letters describing the desert in El Paso. He also sent a number of postcards, and some of his letters to me had pressed desert flowers taped to them. So arriving in this wonderful sunny place was like moving from a black and white movie, or mostly gray movie, to a bright Technicolor one. The atmosphere was optimistic, and it seemed like anything was possible. That's it.
Jürgen Haukel.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, I can hear me too. Now she said Jürgen Haukel, and I'm better known as Jürgen, because when I got to America, nobody could say Jürgen. So I'd heard of Jürgen's lotion. So they didn't call me lotion, luckily, so it's Jürgen. Even my mother started calling me that. Well, I was born in Peenemünde, Germany, 1941, 7 days after Pearl Harbor. So it was a tough time to be born there. And I got stories that I wrote back then, but I really want to tell you about what it was like coming to America. Then I can tell about some of the other stuff later. I'm sure we'll have time. So I just had cataract surgery, so excuse me, I'm not used to readers. But y'all look great out there. Yesterday I was normal here and nearsighted there, and it was really weird, I'll tell you what. Following World War II, my father was selected by Dr. Werner von Braun to join his team on what the U.S. Army called Operation Paperclip. The program was comprised of 118 German scientists, engineers, and technicians assigned to continue developing and advancing the V-2 rocket program. My father, along with the 88 Paperclip team members, immigrated to America on the USS Argentina. That was the first trip. Serving as a troop transporter, arriving in New York from Le Havre, France, arriving on 16 November 1945. This was the first arrival of German scientists and engineers under Operation Paperclip. I wondered how they would be treated in America. There had to be some strong feelings with Americans who lost family members fighting the Nazis. Now this same enemy was coming to America to continue the development of rockets. And I thought some Paperclip team members were thinking that upon entering the United States, they might be treated as prisoners of war. I never saw much of my father during my early childhood. He spent much time at work, and by the time he came home, I was already put to bed for the night. When I woke up the next morning, he had already left for work. After the Operation Paperclip team left for America, the only relation I had with my father was through the food packages he would send. It would be over a year before I would see him again. It was a stressful time for the family, the head of the household moving to the country that had just bombed the German citizenry. My mother, sister, and I were moved to a city called Landshut, which had a U.S. Army base. The Army put the families of the Paperclip team into a block of apartment buildings arranged in square layout, around an open field surrounded by short fence and trimmed hedge. The apartments came 4 to a building, and each family had the upstairs and downstairs. My mother's parents moved in with us. My grandfather, who was a school teacher by profession, had at that time not been reassigned to school in war-torn Germany. This was a good arrangement for us, plus I had a male influence in my life. My grandfather enjoyed teaching my sister and me to count, adding and subtracting. He would put nuts on the table, add some, then take some away. We quickly associated the numbers with how many nuts we had, and after a time of success, my grandfather rewarded us with the nuts to eat. And I got pretty good at math. The quadrangle was a place for recreation for both the soldiers and the German kids. The soldiers used the field in the quadrangle to play baseball. And you could tell they enjoyed this recreation by the enthusiasm they exhibited. Sometimes when the German kids were playing in the quadrangle, the soldiers would observe. One day a soldier threw a chocolate bar among the German kids. A free-for-all erupted, causing the older kids to fight over possession of the chocolate bar. This became a new source of entertainment for the soldiers when they threw numerous bars into the quadrangle. Again, a free-for-all erupted. I was 4 years of age, and when I picked up a chocolate treasure, one of the bigger kids promptly ripped it out of my grasp. And I learned quickly that when I picked up another chocolate bar, I would slip it under my pants. It would melt somewhat in its wrapper, but that didn't matter, as I did get to enjoy the taste of American chocolate. The German neighbors did not think well of the families destined to move to America. Many felt that our fathers were traitors going to America to develop their rocketry program. We would collect rocks and have rock battles with neighboring German kids. We were better off because we had Army-sponsored housing and received food. The neighborhood kids didn't have this benefit and acted out of jealousy and anger. The older kids could throw the rocks further, so at age 4, I would collect rocks thrown by the neighborhood enemy for our ammunition. I don't recall anyone on our side getting hurt. Luckily, none of the mothers ever intervened. In the fall of 1946, we were notified that the families of the paperclip team would be transported to Fort Bliss in El Paso, Texas, in America. It was a mixed message in that a new adventure was forthcoming. We would reunite with my father, but we would leave my grandparents behind. That was heartbreaking to leave my grandparents. I had developed a strong bond, especially with my grandfather, because he was the male figure in my life, and I represented the boy he never had. My grandmother was best at correcting me, whereas I could do no wrong in the eyes of my grandfather. I didn't like my grandmother very much. When we finally left for America, both my grandparents wept, as did my mother. My mother's sister and I boarded the USS George W. Goethals in December of 1946. Now, the George W. Goethals was a troop transporter named after the general who finished building the Panama Canal. If you've ever seen it, of course, they've got a new one coming in now, and I think it's completed now, if I'm not mistaken, but it was fascinating going through it. The passenger list included wives, children, and Operation Paperclip team. The Atlantic Ocean is cold and rough in December. Frequent storms battered the Goethals. We were put in bunk beds where families shared the rooms, and seasickness was common. And the lady, that was Mrs. Holder, by the way, who shared our room, couldn't handle a constant rolling motion. She rarely got up from her bunk. My sister and I never got sick, although the acrid odor of vomit strewn on the floors made us queasy and required a form of hopscotch to avoid the slippery bars. We always headed upstairs to the deck to breathe the cold, fresh sea air. My sister got too close to the railing once and almost fell into the ocean, but a sailor saw the problem and grabbed her before she lost her balance. And there was a rule then, we were not allowed outside then, we had to stay inside the ship, but every now and then we would open the metal hatch and sniff some fresh air. One morning when the sea was particularly rough, my mother's sister and I went to breakfast to enjoy pancakes and honey. The soldier serving as a waiter, decked out in his pressed cotton jacket, was coming toward our table carrying a pitcher of milk intended for the children. He had black skin, which was a new experience for me to see. The ship suddenly lurched sideways unexpectedly, causing the waiter to lose his balance and control of the pitcher of milk. The pitcher contents flew in the air and perfectly drenched me from the top of my head down my body. I was sitting in a puddle of milk. I became upset thinking my mother would take me away to change clothes and I would miss eating pancakes with honey. Other waiters arrived with towels, dabbing up the milk. It was an embarrassing moment for our waiter, and after my mother decided we would stay for breakfast, we received a special attention. To this day, I claim that the waiter baptized me into the land of milk and honey. I turned 5 during that voyage. I recall having to go to the doctor on my birthday and get inoculations required to enter the U.S. They shot me right in the rear end. I also recall getting one shot into my rear end, and although what a strange birthday gift that was, we docked in New York on December 18, 1946. We did not pass through Ellis Island, the naturalization location of immigrants arriving in America. The wives of the paperclip team were documented as American war brides, not as German immigrants. I miss seeing, they didn't allow Germans then, you didn't want any Germans after that war. I miss seeing the Statue of Liberty as a good thought silently slip by early in the morning to its docking place. We got off the ship and stepped onto American soil. Next, we were transported to a train station where we were assigned to a Pullman car. A Pullman served as seats in the daytime and was transformed into a sleeper compartment at night. A compartment was pulled down from the upper outside wall to serve as a bed. My mother slept in the top compartment and my sister and I slept in the seats transformed into beds. I recall thinking the buildings and trees were moving here in America because the train was riding so smoothly. It looked so strange. 5 days later, we arrived in El Paso, Texas, just before Christmas. My father met us at the El Paso train station. We hugged my mother. He hugged my mother for a long time next to my sister, and he patted me on the head. No hug. It was strange because I had no real bond with my father, and that place in my heart was with my grandfather, who we left in Germany. My father's presence was a strange feeling, and I was going to have to get to know and feel comfortable with him. A few days later, the Army arranged to celebrate Christmas and the reunion of the paperclip team with their families with a party, including dinner at the mess hall. I recall feeling very short, and still am compared to these anyway. That's why they gave me this thing. Sitting on the bench in front of my plate, I think my head came about here. I could barely. My lack of height didn't prevent me from enjoying this meal. We had turkey, dressing, mashed potatoes, gravy, green beans, and cranberry gelatin. And we were all given fruit and candy as gifts. This was a good introduction to America.
Thank you. Love hearing all the personal stories. Thank you so much. Now, Klaus Heimberg.
I know all you want to hear about is resourcefulness stories, right? I will do my best to make up for all these people.
Thank
But you know, I'm happy to continue on the nostalgia trip.
Go right ahead.
I mean, it's rosy and lovely.
We still have lots of time, so go for it.
Okay. First thing I wanted to say is, even though we may sound like it, we're not a big clique. We're all different ages. We got split up into different schools. We were in different grades. And for me, just going through this now, you know, I'm seeing a lot of names, and I realize now that I only even knew of maybe 10% of the kids of the Rocket people. All right. So, on the resourcefulness thing. You already mentioned the acreage on Montesano. Like, they bought 40 acres and split it up into lots.
But let me add some. Ingebergla Allen brought some papers. They bought a lot up there, so she brought a map
Mhm.
and some papers in the back, so. that-
Okay, I
we've
don't
got show and
think
tell.
anybody is that interested in that, but
Okay.
it's just like a joint
It
project.
might be.
They might be. Yeah, if you're missing a lot up there, I know my father had one, which was eventually sold. All right, let's see here. They also, I lived on Locust Avenue. Anyway, on our block, 4 families bought 6 lots and split them up into 4. Anyway, so the lots are all a lot and a half wide, and it, basically what it did, now the tax rolls, every time we pay taxes on half a lot and a whole lot, and the house numbers are messed up. You know, they skip. That's another thing. Another thing I should mention is I'd say about a dozen German families were clumped in that area.
At least.
Okay, such that it was called Sauerkraut Hill. Anyway, of course, the von Brauns lived at the highest part of the hill. I guess that's all proper. No, but the thing I wanted to mention, 2 things. Number 1, there was one American family that moved in. I mean, native-born Southern family. I mean, native-born Southern to the point of having 5 kids. You know, like it's the first family that had just 5 instead of 10 kids. They were really nice, Southern Baptist, and I don't know what they thought of all the boozy German socializing. We did have neighborhood